Hello and welcome everyone. Today we've got some great training and documentation strategies to share with those of you that may be embarking on a software implementation. So today our speaker, Jennifer McMillan, is a mechanical engineer with over 25 years experience in the areas of content development and content management. Jennifer's achieved certifications as a professional for Inventor and Fusion 360, and is also recognized as an Autodesk certified instructor. Before we get started, I'd like to give you a brief background on the relationships of our divisions, how we can work together and drive productive and successful technology projects. So again, my name is Jason Barnett. I'm the Vice President of our sales for manufacturing, PLM, and our documentation groups. It's my great pleasure to proceed Jennifer to introduce RAND and its subsidiaries. And I'm here today because I have a unique view because I manage sales for 3 of these 4 subsidiaries represented on the screen. So let me tell you about our company. RAND Worldwide is a family of technology companies. In a nutshell, what we do, we acquire, we resell, we create and implement technology for our clients to drive better employee and customer outcomes. So we've got an extensive reach in North America with more than 40 offices and over 400 employees. And then we have our specialized sales teams, there are over 140 of us. And then our engineering group has over 120 subject matter experts with competencies in all the major engineering disciplines. So over to the right, you'll see a simple look at our footprint, but working from the inside out, you'll see RAND. That's our parent company. We're a publicly traded company under the symbol RWWI. To the right, you'll see RAND Sim, short for RAND Simulation. They're providers of simulation, consulting, and software. They solve the world's toughest challenges digitally. RAND 3D at the bottom works with customers to document, leveraging ASCENT, by the way, facilitate and manage their product lifecycle management workflows, training, and adoption. And then Imagine It at the top is the largest and the best Autodesk partner in North America. And we've, over the past 30, 40 years, have developed systems and teams to help our customers buy, effectively use, and enhance their Autodesk products. So finally, ASCENT, their sole focus is documentation, and I'm not going to steal Jennifer's thunder. I'll let her speak to you about that today. So then on the outside of all these circles, you'll see our strategic partnerships. These are really important groups that help add to our core and give us strength. So, and the beauty of all these companies is that we all work together and we leverage each other to help our customers. So, and we find as the reliance on technology continues to grow, there's a need to move just beyond implementation and training. There's a new era that adds things like standards, continual guidance for employees to complete a transformational journey successfully. So what Jennifer is going to share with you today, to me, are some tactics that companies with critical systems like aerospace or medical industries have used for years. And I think that my goal for today is to bring that to all of you. So now I'll hand it over to Jennifer, and thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jason. So to get started, I do want to tell you just a little more about ASCENT as a company, as a division of RAND. We've been developing learning content for more than 20 years, and personally myself, I've been involved right from the very beginning. Everyone at our team at ASCENT are dedicated to curriculum development and documentation as their primary role. We have instructional designers, engineering subject matter experts that encompass multiple industries. We have technical writers and editors, as well as project management professionals. Initially, our project work, and probably where you've probably heard of us before, was really focused on developing standard learning guides for whether it's Autodesk, PTC, Dassault Systems, any of their design tools, or even their data management products. And these guides would be used in the standard training classes that might be offered by Imagine It, or in some cases, all the content that you would have in a self-paced learning portal like Productivity Now. But, in fact, a significant amount of work that we've been doing today is really working directly with customers like yourselves, or directly even with software developers like Autodesk, to design and develop learning solutions. And honestly, it's this unique combination of expertise that is something I'm really super proud to say really does set us apart in the industry. In this session, I want to share my 25 years of experience, to really get you thinking about, how you should be approaching training and documentation as, you embark on a brand new software technology implementation, whether that project is either going to be large or small. So to get started, as companies like yourselves adopt tools from any software provider, Autodesk or others, I really highly recommend that you look at learning and documentation, and that you really consider it as a part of your complete implementation plan. The three main objectives in my session today are really highlighted here in these boxes. And they each represent, in my opinion, a really important stage where I feel you have to plan around the training and the implementation documentation, really to have a successful project, and to encourage that adoption of your whole new technology. So right at the beginning, I want to get started by really just talking about how the importance of training your internal implementation team is. You want to provide them with the necessary technical knowledge so that they can make those really tough decisions that are to come during implementation. This knowledge is then going to shape and determine all of those workflows that they're going to start to define. And then, as my third objective here, I want to really spend some time talking about some of the key strategies and ideas and concepts and things that you want to keep in mind when it comes time to start thinking about training all of those end users. And it's really that training at the very end that's going to really secure and ensure that you have that successful adoption of your technology. So firstly, I want to start with that very first box, which is around training your implementation team. So this is your internal team that you've assigned to work on this project. As everyone is well aware, the selection of this team is certainly the first step. The people that are generally selected for this team may be selected based on simply their company knowledge, maybe their technical experience, or maybe even some of them have experience with the new software when they worked at other organizations. But generally what is really common here is that not everyone is going to have the same in-depth knowledge of the new software that you're going to be bringing in. So what you want to do is make sure that in deciding kind of how best to train all these people, you keep a couple things in mind. And these are some of the things that, I talk to customers about. So first off, what training does the team need? And honestly, the answer to this is going to widely vary. Some of you may still be deciding on what software products to use or what vendors to use, or some may already know the tool. So it will depend on, whether or not you have to go to multiple software training classes, or, if you've chosen the software that you can directly focus on that one product. The big thing I'd like you to keep in mind, and it's a really good kind of little saying, is you don't know what you don't know. So it's always a great thing to keep that in mind, because unless you're training everybody and unless you're giving them the knowledge that they know, they can't implement a software if they don't know everything that it's possible to do. So, at this point in making decisions, you want to really have a clear picture of everything that the software can do so that the team can start making all those educated decisions. I would recommend not limiting the training at this point. So, focus on sending this group to all of the training that possibly is available. Don't narrow it too much. The next question I get is, when should this training be completed? And honestly, in my opinion, as soon as possible. Again, knowing what the software can do is going to allow you for better decision making. One big caution here, though, is that this training should be really focused only for the implementation team. I would not recommend pulling all of your users into this initial training. there should be time allocated, maybe at the end of implementation, where all of your end users go through specific training, and that's why I added that third bullet. So we'll talk about that one a little more in the coming slides. And lastly, what format should the training be in? Many implementation and training partners that you're going to work with, like ImagineIt, offer open enrollment training where you can kind of go into a classroom with the instructor, even with other customers, and you take training, whether it's in the classroom or even online, but you have access to that trainer. So that's kind of one option. You can also look at talking to your providers about custom dedicated classes where you say, I only want my implementation team involved, and you're only teaching to that group. So that's an option as well. Many partners also offer self-paced, being like more online learning, in ImagineIt's case, offered through Productivity Now. In my opinion, although self-paced is an option, my feeling that is that at this point, the objective is really to ensure that everyone has the exact same baseline knowledge to make decisions. The self-paced route is going to give you all the same content, but that interaction and that focus on each topic is certainly going to be different for everyone if they're doing it on their own. Team members certainly get distracted with other work commitments, and it's really tough in that self-paced environment to have that replicate that collaborative environment that they would have in a classroom. So I would certainly, look at this point, looking at, doing that in-person training. And also you want to look at getting that training done as quickly as possible so that really you can get to the goal of starting implementation. At this point, this training should not be considered or used as a way to define how the organization is going to use the software. Its intent really should be focused on giving the team all the knowledge they're going to need to make informed decisions. So all of that collaborative discussion on what's going to happen and how the software is going to be implemented really needs to be done after this training when you really get into the implementation phase. So throughout the entire implementation, budget will certainly be an important consideration. At this point, I really don't see a need for any expensive customized training materials to be developed. There's certainly going to be time for that, but for now, I would recommend focusing on the standard out-of-the-box training that providers like ImagineIt offer for all their software products. I do think maybe focusing on a dedicated class is worth the money, so you can have your team, it will fit your schedule, maybe even have their trainer travel to you so you can further reduce your traveling costs for all of your team members. Another mistake that customers often make here is trying to fit in too much in too short a time, or narrowing the focus of the training too early. So definitely keeping to that standard out-of-the-box training can certainly avoid this, because those offerings have been designed to specifically cover all of the software functionality. So if you're looking at a 5-day training and you say you want to have it done in 2 days, you're certainly going to have to cut out material. And by cutting out material, again, you're limiting what you're teaching your users. So you want to teach them everything so they can make those informed decisions. And finally, if you're working with an implementation partner like ImagineIt, they can certainly help guide you on many of these decisions on how to train this internal team to find one that works for you. So now that you've trained the implementation team, they are ready to get started to make all those decisions on how the software is going to be rolled out and how the overall plan is going to now start to come into focus. My objective 2 for today's session is really going to be focused on specifically documentation considerations and things that really you want to look at during the implementation phase of your project. So they've decided the software, now they know how to use it, and they're starting to make those key decisions on, how to use the software. So they're starting to design workflows and standards. But at this point, only they know that process. So by accurately documenting all of this knowledge that, they're talking to maybe their consulting partners, they're, internally deciding on workflows. By documenting this knowledge, it isn't just known by that team. It's going to be documented so that it can be then shared and referenced as you then start moving through the final stages and you look at how the design teams are going to be using that software day to day. So this is the key here. I want to talk about, some strategies around documenting all of your standards. So some things to think about here when it comes time to really putting pen to paper, we'll say, is, what format should this documentation be in? And, certainly I'd say most customers choose, Microsoft Word. However, I want to just give you one thought here is before you even decide on a format, you want to make a decision on how everyone is actually going to be accessing or consuming the information. Will they be going to SharePoint, where maybe you have access to all and they can search through and open and close documents? Maybe it's all set up on some wiki type homepage for your internet that's going to provide, searching capabilities across, multiple standards and documents. So you should always also consider maybe who's going to be updating these documents as changes are made, because certainly the regular maintenance of these documents is key to them staying current. And honestly, if users know that they're being maintained and they're actually being looked after and changes are made, they're much more likely to continually use them. And again, that's going to foster that adoption for your software. So, think about all this stuff before you decide on your actual format that you're going to be using to document everything. The purpose of properly documenting your standards and workflow is something that I think all of you certainly understand the importance of. You certainly don't want the knowledge of how things are going to be working to remain only with that select few group of users. The key that is now that all these decisions are made is that you don't delay with getting started with your documentation process. It's certainly going to be a work in progress throughout the whole implementation and even beyond. So getting started is certainly a really key point to do that. I think where a lot of customers struggle is in setting aside that proper time and the resources to ensure that the documentation is done right. In my experience, the most successful implementations are where the team, and maybe even more importantly, management, certainly understands that good documentation takes time, where they know it shouldn't just be added to, another team member's to-do list when they certainly have other responsibilities. I would highly recommend incorporating a documentation specialist onto your implementation team, where, this resource's sole responsibility should be documenting the standards and workflows that the team's developing. These types of specialists are really excellent in taking that technical knowledge from, the subject matter experts on the team and putting it into clear and consistent and concise format that ultimately downstream is going to be really easy to use and maintain. I've also mentioned this, but ultimately how these standards are consumed by all the end users also can be a key metric with the success of your implementation. So if you're able to kind of evaluate that everyone is actually hitting these documents and they're reading them and that type of thing. So again, the documentation specialist really can take the time to maybe to ask all those right questions about how everyone's going to consume the information, so that you can come up with the right format and solution for you. And one final thing I'd like to recommend is looking at incorporating an all-encompassing document policy. Basically what this does, it enables you to define the objectives of all of your standards. It defines, who must adhere to them. It's going to explain why they're being implemented and how to use them. Describing whose responsibility it is to govern them and enforce them. And it can even, document, the change process and, how they're being kept up to date. So having this type of policy, it's nothing that's super complex, but again, it helps gain that confidence with your end users that you really have like a vested interest in these documents, and that it may mean something, and that they're going to be maintained, and that users can count on them being looked after and are able to be read and understand very easily. So then my moves kind of to my final objective, and that's really where we're going to focus on what you should be considering when deciding how to train the entire design team. And the training will involve both software skills, because you're implementing new software, as well as skills on how they're supposed to be rolling out and using those standards and those workflows that have been defined and now documented. Step 2, where we documented all those by that implementation team. So, ultimately the purpose here of this step is, of course, ensuring that the entire design team is going to be able to do exactly what you want them to do when they start to begin new projects, right? You don't want to delay. You don't want people going back to old software. You want them to have all the skills and confidence in moving forward with new projects. All of those important decisions that have been made by the team, that have been documented now, all of that must be now passed on to your user base, your end users, to ensure the successful adoption of your software moving forward. After all this investment, you do not want to solely rely on each user, learning the software on their own, or here being thrown all these documents and being responsible for reading them themselves, understanding them, and probably most importantly, interpreting those standards and expecting that all of them are going to interpret them the exact same way. So you certainly want to look at officially training everybody on this. So here are a couple considerations, I certainly want you to think about. As you're all aware, training does not amount to an insignificant cost. As much as I've left this to the end of the implementation process in terms of training everybody, it is certainly something that you need to consider, plan for, budget for as early as possible in the process. You should also consider some answers to some of the following questions as well. When should the training occur? As I mentioned earlier, I certainly do not recommend running everyone through training too early, because you run the risk of everyone really not being able to practice the skills because the software hasn't been fully implemented. So it's certainly a bit of a balancing act, when to start training, and as you near the end of rollout, and certainly any kind of training partners can help you with that and coming up with the right solution for you. In terms of the next question, what do you have to decide what type of training everyone is going to need? I personally like to separate out the skills training. That's where you're teaching all of the users how to learn the software first, and then follow it up with more customized training that's going to teach them how to use the software in your environment. So using the standards and the workflows that the team has developed. Some customers do like to combine the two of them. The reason I don't is I personally find it's much easier for students to forget the standards if they're lost really in learning the picks and clicks of the software. So if they're working, trying to figure out how to move around and navigate and do what they normally did in old software, they're focused on that. And throwing in standards at the same time, is not ideal. In some situations, you may want to do that if it's a smaller change of software, change of standard, that type of thing, then, you might look at doing something like that. But, certainly there's lots of variation for many different customers. In making these decisions, you may also find that different users need different training because of, their roles. So I would look at your user group, focus on grouping users by role, and that's going to help them focus their training, or the training they're going to need specifically for them. And honestly, it may reduce the amount of training that you need to put everyone through. So you don't necessarily have to put everyone through the exact same skills training. Maybe some need certain skills and others need other skills. So certainly look at the roles, and that's a great way to help manage your budget as well. And then finally, what is the best format for delivery? So I talked a little bit about the format earlier, where I talked about the internal training, training the internal implementation team. You know, we talked about live instructor training, online instructor training. We talked about e-learning. And for this user group, I find there's probably a blended solution that's going to work best for you. And it's got to be one that's going to work with your budget, with your user group, that type of thing. I wanted to mention before I move on, one project I just recently worked on and just kind of explain how they chose their training. So this was a very large federal government agency. They had 1,100 users that they needed to train. They were moving from MicroStation to AutoCAD. However, they were keeping their data management software in ProjectWise. So they had to train everybody on the software skills, and they chose to do that first. And what they did was trained all their 1,100 users with a standard out-of-the-box AutoCAD training class offered through ImagineIt. And what they did there is they had a mix of instructor-led in person as well as online. So, but they really felt strongly about having an instructor, we'll say, in the room that was teaching the software skills to them. So they worked through training all of those users. And then during that time, they were working with us at the ASCENT group to develop custom learning content that was going to teach how the software was going to interact with their data management system with ProjectWise. So day-to-day, how they would start the day, logging into the database, checking out files, checking back files, those types of things. And so that custom development was where they decided to spend their budget on creating learning content. And once that was all done, those 1,100 users were also put through this training class. And again, they did that with instructor-led, both online and in class. So they had a kind of a combination of both there. They're at the end of that project, and they've engaged with ASCENT again, just about to start a new project with them, where what they're going to be doing now is they've realized that they are constantly hiring new people, and they can't have that person not active in the software right away, because they can't wait for an instructor-led class. They can't fill a class, over the next 2 months, trying to get enough people, new hires, to fill it. So we're looking at creating an e-learning solution for them that is going to leverage Productivity Now. So it will use still all our standard AutoCAD training inside of Productivity Now, but then we're going to put all of their custom training in there as well, all of that AutoCAD ProjectWise custom training material, and develop some unique solutions to help them with leveraging, pretending, I guess we'll say, simulating the use of their database. So that's the next project for them. But I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of some different formats that you can think of. And honestly, everyone's solution is completely different. That's why I love my job. I love talking to people about different solutions, coming up with, talking about your challenges and what you're going to want. So certainly, if you feel free to reach out to me or to Jason at all about any of this as you move forward. So I talked a little for sure about skills training, and I certainly talked about kind of the customized solution with, the example I just gave you. Just kind of wanted to give one last thing here. In terms of, at this point, I often get the question, how much is this training going to cost me? And firstly, you certainly want to consider that content development, if any is needed, and delivery are two different costs. So, you definitely need to consider them as two different costs. Training providers like ImagineIt will certainly be able to give you daily rates, so you can start to plan for this. But in terms of custom learning content development, honestly, it's very difficult to give an answer to this without knowing how the software is going to be used. We need to know what the workflows are going to be. What are the standards? What are we going to be teaching? That type of thing. So, often I do give rough order of magnitude estimates for customers. at the beginning of a project. After just initial discussions, I can say, I think this is in the ballpark. But to be very honest, it's a rough order of magnitude. To give you that accurate estimate is really impossible until after we really start to see your standards and your workflows and understand what it is that we want to train all of the users on. So I mentioned that users definitely need skills training and training separately on standards and workflows. In both cases, there can be a wide range of customization costs. If you just decide on standard out-of-the-box training, there's no cost there. You're simply paying for the delivery of the training. However, sometimes customers want to reduce the training content. So let's say with an implementation of Inventor, there could be 10 days of training, and there's enough content in that standard training that you don't want to teach your users that you could cut out. So we call that kind of topic-based customization. There's a bit of a cost there, but it's really minimal when you start to look at the savings because you're saving days on delivery. Exercise or project customization is also one that actually a lot of customers really like. So let's say you take the standard out-of-the-box training. Students are doing exercises, they're learning the software, but they're not doing it with, we'll call it your widgets, right? Where they're not designing your parts, they're not designing your buildings. An exercise or project customization is often something that we can create that uses your data set. So it's something often used at the end of training. So at the very end, it could be a couple hours where students actually are provided with a exercise that has them walk through creation of, something with their data in mind. And, customers really do like that because oftentimes the comment when you go back to training is, how do I, extrapolate what I just learned to my building, that type of thing. So it's a nice little customization that you might want to look at doing in terms of skills training. And then certainly where the big money, I guess, is spent is, the standards and workflow training. And sometimes users do unique customization that assumes that the software knowledge is there. So they've already taken skills and we're just teaching them the new workflows. So that's one way of creating unique customization. And then, the final one here, and probably the most expensive, is if you decide to merge the two of them together where you're doing both at the same time. Certainly that one is a bit more effort because we're teaching them skills training as well as any kind of unique workflows. So, there's certainly ranges in there. In those last two scenarios, that is all your owned IP. So as a project, it's handed to you guys, you own it at the end of it all. Okay. So just to finish up this topic, I'd like to leave you with, a few recommendations around this training your team. So, that last bit of the project, definitely look at user roles. This is going to help you identify learning paths that really define the least your users are going to need to know. So you're not training them on more than what they need. Consider all of the delivery methods. It could be varied, depending even, and I didn't even mention this for the other users, is your skill set of your users. Some may want self-paced, some may want instructor-led. So consider that. You want to have their buy-in so adoption is successful. So consider that in choosing your delivery methods as well. Decide where to efficiently use your budget. I work with customers all the time that say, I have, X dollars to spend. What can we do? And, work backwards, right? Let's do it like that. And certainly I can offer solutions for any of those types of things. Ultimately, your end users are key to the successful implementation. I want to leave you with this last thought. Don't wait to think about this phase to the end. Plan for it right up front. Even when the team's going through implementation training, think about what it's going to take to train the team at the very end. So, over the course of kind of describing all of the key aspects of, learning and documentation that you should be considering during your implementation, I've certainly mentioned a lot of the types of, partners or skill sets that you're going to want to look for. And I certainly want to plug ASCENT as our company and what we can do to help. Whether, you would be interested in partnering with us or someone else, What's really key here is that I want you to understand the types of expertise that you really want to make sure you're working with. You know, I previously mentioned that we have technical writers, instructional designers, technical subject matter experts, and all of these are full-time employees. That's all they do. They don't do consulting and then on the side do all of this stuff. They are technical experts in documentation. And, you know, those are the types of resources you want to make sure that you're working with. You know, during the documentation phase as well, our technical editors and our documentation specialists certainly can help consult with you on formats, design templates, you know, and how you can create those professional quality documents. And then during any of the training stages, you know, our learning content developers as well can help design and develop unique learning content that's going to meet your needs. You know, we certainly are uniquely positioned in this market because of our relationship with our sister company, ImagineIt, you know, and we have constant access to them on their technical resources, you know, and, you know, I work very closely with Jason and his team as well. So, you know, it's certainly something that I'm happy to say, and I'm proud to say that it really sets us apart. So to finish up, I'd like to just review quickly this summary image, really that highlights, you know, all of the learning and documentation elements that we've discussed and that really you need to keep in mind during your implementation. You know, this is not a pie chart that describes effort. It's simply showing kind of all the pieces of the pie you should be considering. In the upper right quadrant, we began by talking about the importance, you know, of sending your implementation team for training. Certainly, it's going to ensure that they learn and understand everything that that software has to offer. You know, don't limit the scope at this point of the training, you know, allow them to learn everything that they're going to need so that they can make those informed decisions during implementation. You know, I have this second implementation quadrant here kind of in gray, simply because it wasn't the focus of this presentation. But it is during this phase that all of the decisions on the standards and workflows will be made. So it really nicely leads into my next quadrant where we talked about the importance of documenting, you know, those standards. You know, this is where you're recording all of the instructions and the processes and everything that that design team is going to be following. So it's really your playbook that's going to reflect all of the decisions that you've made. You know, we talked about ensuring that you allow the proper time to complete this step. I suggested incorporating a documentation specialist on your team so that, you know, the documents are clear and concise and easily consumable. I also mentioned the possibility of a documentation policy. You know, that's really going to explain that who, that what, the where, the how all of those documents should be used. You know, often these two bottom quadrants are done absolutely in parallel, you know, or just prior to the completion of the implementation. So that basically all of those documents are ready for that final step when you're ready to train the design team. You know, and most recently we just spent time talking about that, so I won't really summarize that one too much, you know, but the key thing here is plan for it. Think about it, you know, right at the very beginning on how you're going to train this entire team, get an idea of, you know, what the costs you're looking at so that you can incorporate that into the whole implementation to have success. So once again, thank you so much for attending today. And I certainly hope that I was able to give you some things, you know, to think about as you kind of embark on your new software implementation projects.